Hi, I'm Kristen.
And I'm her little brother, William.
We're from the podcast Guide to the Unknown, where we only talk about scary stuff and have a good time doing it.
Come join the scary fun, everyone.
Wherever you get your podcasts, you'll find Guide to the Unknown.
Hello and welcome to Scare You to Sleep. I'm your host, Shelby Novak, and I'm here to read you some true stories sent in by your fellow listeners. Do you ever sit and ponder the concept of existence? What are we? Where are we? Is this a simulation? Are we a collective hallucination? Or is it something else, something much more complicated, or maybe much simpler? Anyway, how are you this week? I thought we could start this episode of True Horror off with some deep thoughts. Now, we can move on to the meat, the reason why you're here, whether it's because free will exists or because the person who created your sim told you to. Either way, let's begin. I wanted to start the episode off with a bang, and I do believe Billy has provided it for us. Buckle up for this one. This really happened. Not all monsters are actual monsters. I was 10 years old in June of 1990 when my parents split up, and soon after, divorced. At that time, we lived in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where my father was stationed at Fort Collins. We were a military family, and an outdoorsy family as it was, or at least my father and I were. My mother and older sister, not so much. I loved camping, hiking, fishing, and horseback riding. And my mother took my sister and I to Price, Utah to live with our grandmother. It was a bit of a change for me, not to mention a culture shock. We moved there in November of 1990, so in January of 1991, my birth month, I just wanted to get outside and camp and hike as an 11-year-old kid who was very hurt and angry about all these changes that no one seemed to care how it made me feel. I begged and pleaded and threw tantrums. I was new to the desert setting and was more than curious. I wanted to explore. At this time, my mother had started dating this man. They had been dating about 2 months in February of 1991, when he told my mother he would be glad to take us camping. He told me he understood why I was so angry and wanted me to be happy. Sounds great, right? So, at the end of February, he took my sister, who is 5 years older than me, myself, and my mother out to the San Rafael Desert in southern Utah to camp for 2 nights. I was so excited. Right before we were to leave, my mother's work called and told her she would have to work Saturday, even though she had requested the weekend. But, low man on the totem pole and all, no choice was given. It was either come into work or don't come back. We left Friday to go to the desert, and on Saturday morning, after breakfast, my mother left for work and took my older sister, who had her learner's permit and was wanting to get more driving practice in. That left me alone with the boyfriend. At first it was fine. We hiked up a mesa to a cave where he showed me some very cool Native American paintings, showed me how to look for arrowheads and flint, and all in all was telling me about the Navajo and the Paiute peoples who had inhabited the areas. I was fascinated. Then, like a cloud passing over the sun, his mood darkened. Very, very quickly. To this day, I don't know if this was something I had done or if it was just because of me. He started to tell me I was not a good child, that I was a brat who didn't deserve his kindness and knowledge. He told me my mother deserved better, a better daughter. He told me everyone would be better if I would just walk off into the desert, and disappeared. He told me my mother felt the same, and that's why she agreed to go out to the desert to camp, to get rid of me. She hated camping, I knew that, so what he was saying was making sense to my 11-year-old brain. Now, just in case you're not aware of the desert weather in Utah in the winter, It can be a very beautiful day in the 70s just to drop below freezing at night. So, on this day, it was nice, so I wasn't wearing a coat, just jeans and a t-shirt. Okay, back to that day. He told me I should run, so he wouldn't have to hurt me. He then started loading what I believed to be a .38. I was young and not as knowledgeable as I am now with firearms. So I ran. I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. I was just crying and running and very scared. I have no idea how long I ran or how far. All I knew is I needed to get away and out of sight, which is what I did. So when I finally felt safe enough to stop running, when I couldn't see the camp or smoke from the fire, I started to look for somewhere to hide. I found another cave and sat inside it for a good bit of time. Not sure how much time elapsed, but I knew I couldn't stay there. He would find me, I thought, and then that would be it. The end. I thought I had no one, so I needed to find someone. But how and where? I remembered my father teaching me that if you are ever lost in the mountains, to find a river if possible and follow it downstream, and that would most likely lead you to a town, city, or civilization of some sort. So that's what I did. I found out later that week that in the desert you're supposed to go upstream, not down. I still don't know if that's true, but that's what they told me. So I remembered from our drive in the previous day that there was a river somewhere nearby, so I went off to find it. And find it I did, then proceeded to follow it downstream, walking somewhat blindly while lost in the thought about my mom not wanting me and how I should have never begged to go out there. This was all my fault, and I was probably going to die out there, and that was all my fault too. Why was I such a brat? So, the sun was starting to go down now. If I were to throw out a guess, it was probably about 4:30-ish, maybe 5 p.m. by now. I had been walking since about 10 a.m. The temp is starting to drop, and I started to cry again. I was scared. I wasn't paying attention and tripped and fell in this small river. Great. Now I am alone, scared, and wet. I was going to die out here, I just knew it. So the shock of the water snapped my brain into thinking, and I realized I need shelter. I have, at this time, no idea if there are predators here, and if so, what kind? Bears? Wolves? I had no idea. I didn't want to die. I wanted to tell my mom I was sorry, and please let me come home. I would never make her do this again, and I would be a good girl. I didn't want to die. I found another small cave, not much bigger than a coat closet. Well, maybe not a cave, more a small alcove that afforded me coverage, and I curled up into a ball under my t-shirt and tried to calm myself. I was so cold, and the temperature was steadily dropping. If I remember correctly, it got down to 38 that night. Not below freezing, but at that time it felt like it. Then the howling and yips started. They told me it was coyotes, and maybe it was, and my scared, overreacting brain freaked out, but to this day I have never seen coyotes that big, nor have I seen them walk upright. There were several of them, maybe 5, but they were moving around me so quickly in the darkness, and it was so dark. The only light was from the half moon, and it was not illuminating a lot. I look back now, and I'm glad it wasn't. These things seemed to circle me throughout the night, almost like they were curious, or maybe just messing with me. They did get close enough for me to see that they looked like really big, scary dogs, but they didn't seem to be threatening me, if that makes any sense. Though at the time, I didn't care what they wanted. They needed to go away or kill me and make it quick. At least, I hoped it would be quick. Sadly enough, I thought this to be more preferable to freezing to death or starving to death. I had already resigned myself to one or the other. Now this? I have no idea how I fell asleep or if I passed out from fright, but I woke up and it was very early dawn. That in-between time similar to twilight, and I was alone again. My legs were numb and it was hard to walk. I would get strange shooting pains through the numbness every time I took a step. I was hungry and thirsty and I wanted my mom. I started crying again and telling myself out loud that it was my fault and I did this to myself. When I saw it, it looked like a large dog or wolf. It was staring at me from top of a ridge. It yipped at me, then ran the other direction. I stared at it dumbly, unsure what to do next. Would it eat me? Would it leave me alone? What do I do? Then, there it was again, or at least I think it was the same one. But this one was now at the bottom of the ridge, maybe a football field away from me, and it too yipped at me. But this time, it didn't run away. It turned around and walked away from me, slowly, and kept turning to look at me. Every time it would look back at me, it would yip again, like it wanted me to follow it. So me, having nothing else to do with my day, followed. I mean, at this point, I couldn't see it getting much worse. I followed it for maybe an hour, maybe longer. The sun had come up completely when it finally stopped and turned around and stared at me for what seemed like forever, until the noise of an engine could be heard. And then just like that, it took off, and the truck came into view. It was a state park ranger out looking for me. I have never been so happy. I started to attempt to jump up and down but fell due to my legs and feet. He jumped out of his truck, scooped me up, and placed me in the passenger seat. He radioed in that I had been found, gave me a Snickers and a Coke, and boy, I tell you, to this day, was the best Snickers and Coke I ever had. I found out I had severe hyperthermia and frostbite on 90% of both of my feet. They wanted to cut off my toes. I'm glad my mother didn't allow that, though to this day I have nerve damage in all of them, and if my feet get cold, the pain is excruciating. I also found out my mother didn't want me left out there. He wanted my mom to himself, and I was in the way. To my knowledge, they never found him. He left the desert that day, called my mom at work to tell her I was gone, and she was free. Apparently, upon listening to her response, realized he made a mistake, so he ran. They told me I must have been hallucinating the big dog, coyote, wolf things due to the hypothermia. When I was 15, I was with my best friend, who is full-blooded Navajo. She asked me to tell her great-grandmother about what happened to me and what I saw. She told me of a legend her grandmother told her about a family of skinwalkers who were supposedly in the San Rafael Swell, who were well known to not be hostile or harmful. They just wanted to be left alone. Maybe it was a hallucination brought on by my 11-year-old mind and hypothermia. Or maybe not all monsters are monsters. And in my experience, the only monster in my story was of the human kind. But in any case, thank you to whatever or whoever it was. I am alive because of you. I still have a hard time with this today. I get emotionally unstable if I get too cold or if I feel lost and don't know where I am. I can't control it. I know it's a form of PTSD. Thank you so much, Billy, for that story. That was absolutely fantastic. And I mean, that's a weird way to put that, but it was a fascinating story, and I'm so glad you're okay. I cannot believe this. I mean, I can. You know, there's been a big thing I'm sure you've all seen around the internet lately. Some of you may even be sick of it, but would you rather be stuck in the woods? As women, would you rather be stuck in the woods with a man or a bear? And so many women choose the bear. And your story is a very good example of why so many women choose the bear. Thank you, Billy. This submission is a quick one from Ilya, who I think I owe an apology to for possibly causing to be a little haunted. Hello there. I am a 26 years old male and my native language is Persian, so I apologize for my mistakes in forward. I'm really into horror games and movies and also really love your podcast. I usually listen to your episodes so I fall asleep. Since I'm a huge fan of true horror episodes, I was listening to the True Horror 18 the other night until I fell asleep around 1 a.m. After a short while, I woke up and another random episode was still playing. I felt my room is hot, so I turned on the AC and tried to continue sleeping. Once more, I woke up. At the moment, I didn't realize I was sleeping on the floor of the room next to mine, which belongs to my sister, but she wasn't there that night. It was extremely cold in there, despite the fact that there is no AC in her room, and the podcast was still being played. I felt it's hard to breathe, so I wanted to reach for my asthma inhaler, but there was something inside me keeping me from moving. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't move any parts of my body that much. It was still hard to breathe, but somehow I knew it's not going to take long, and I decided not to make loud noises or anything, not to worry my mom. After a dozen seconds, I was free and I could breathe normally. I grabbed my phone. It was around 4 a.m. I paused the podcast and tried to sleep in panic for the last time. I woke up in the morning, I was in my room, and that was the moment I realized I wasn't in my own room the other time. And the terrifying part was the podcast not being played, and somehow I paused it already. It's a very confusing experience, and I really wanted to share it with you since it was related to the podcast. Thank you for the great work. Keep going. Thank you, Ilya, and I believe you experienced sleep paralysis. It's very scary, and it's a very real phenomenon. It is not up for debate. I've experienced it several times. I experienced it a lot when I was younger, when I was around 17, 18, and that sounds exactly like what you experienced, and I'm so sorry, and I'm so sorry that you had to listen to me yammering on whilst you experienced your first, hopefully last, sleep paralysis experience session. I don't know what you'd call it. But yeah, so thank you for writing in. And again, my apologies. I hope that my show didn't somehow trigger your sleep paralysis. Because if so, that's gonna be bad for business for me. All right, Ilya, thank you again for writing in. All right, this next one is not paranormal, but still incredibly scary, and comes to us from Rosie. I was in the 7th grade when it happened. I was the stage manager for my school play, and it was held on a Friday night. My friends and I had a plan to go to one of their houses, I'll call her Jane, after school until it was time for the play. Then we would all go to my play, and they could watch it while I was backstage, before we went back to Jane's house and slept over. I'll call my other friend Cora. When it was almost time to leave, Jane's mom still wasn't back at the house, so the 3 of us had to walk to the school. My friend's house is pretty close, so it wasn't that big of a deal. As we were walking, a silver van slowed to a crawl as it passed us, and the man inside said, "Come here, girls," gesturing for us to get in. Cora and I didn't notice at first, but Jane, who the man was talking to, did see. She started running, and me and Cora quickly followed. She told us what happened, and we became just as uneasy. We thought we saw the same car again and again that day. I don't know what would have happened if we had all been a little bit younger, a bit more trusting. Would we have been the name and photo on true crime television? Thank you, Rosie, and I am so glad you did not take the candy from the stranger. He didn't offer candy, but you know, the idea of that. I'm so glad you're all safe, and that Cora used her senses to get you all the heck out of there. This next submission comes from Steve, who said he found my show when I was a guest on Hometown Ghost Stories. I did a couple of live streams with them, and it was so much fun. So glad you decided to follow the show, Steve. And go check out Hometown Ghost Stories. The live streams I did with them are available on YouTube, by the way, if you'd like to check those out. And here is Steve's story. Bardstown, Kentucky, spring of '91. We all probably remember our first funeral, the loved one we lost, how we felt, the emptiness and the tears. But for me, it's the paranormal. I didn't know I had a paranormal experience at the time, but now when I think about it, It scares me to my core. This being the first funeral I ever attended, my 11-year-old self had to get out of there. The body of my grandma, all the crying sad people, the casket, all this running through my mind was too much. Outside, I felt better. Next door to the funeral home, I see a little white house with an inviting backyard surrounded by a wooden fence. A swing set, perfect, I thought, as I made my way through the old wooden gate. I sit in the swing collecting my thoughts. I feel 2 hands on my back. At first, I thought it was one of my cousins. Then I hear an unfamiliar female voice say, "Need a push?" Then another female voice say, "Do you like our playground?" Turning around to see who was there, I see 2 girls about my age, their blonde hair glowing in the sunlight. Twins, I thought to myself. They looked identical from the way their hair had ponytails to their matching blue and white dresses. They asked what I was doing there. I told them I came over from the funeral home and that I was attending my grandmother's funeral. They said they played a lot with kids that came over from funerals and that everyone thinks that their playground was for the funeral home. We played together for about another half hour or so. Then the time came for me to go when I heard my mother calling my name from next door. I told my newly found friends bye and hurried through the wooden gate back to the funeral home. The funeral went on, like most do. Fast forward a couple years later, I'm 13 at another funeral at the same funeral home where my grandmother was. I go outside and see the little white house next door to the funeral home, thinking of the twins I played with a couple years before. I go through the wooden gate into the backyard, but this time it looked different. This time not as inviting as it was the previous years when I was there. The old wooden fence falling down in places. The playground area had tall weeds. The swing that I played on was there, but only hung from one chain. I made my way to the back door that, to me, didn't look like anyone had been out of in quite some time. I knocked on the door and waited for a while. I could hear someone making their way to the door. As it opened, it wasn't the twin girls I was expecting, but an older lady with white hair and a long pink nightgown. I said, "I'm sorry to bother you, but I was at the funeral next door, and I was checking if the twins could come out and play." She looked at me in disbelief and stared at me for what I thought was an eternity. Then she said what sent chills through me to this day. "Honey, the twins have been dead for 40 years. That was fun. Thank you, Steve. This next one comes from Chris. I absolutely love the pod. I thought there were no new spooky podcasts for this horror-obsessed gremlin to fall in love with. I'm happy to say that I was wrong. Thank you for giving us chill seekers something to gush about. I have a couple creepy college stories I'd like to share with you. I got my bachelor's degree about 10 years ago at a private college in my small Michigan hometown. It is an old establishment dating back to the mid-1800s. Being as old as it is, the school is full of legend, lore, and memories. Some of them happy, some of them come as a part of tradition. However, some people think that a few of these legends and lore come from the supernatural. Because of the stories I have heard, and from 1 or 2 personal experiences, I believe them. First, I think we should talk about the theater on campus. It is the only original structure that stands today. Originally, the building served as the college chapel. There are a few stories of supposed spirits that haunt the theater. Apparently, there is a ghostly little boy that likes to greet people on the theater staircase. From what I've heard, he's not exactly the happiest little ghost that's ever graced this planet from beyond. However, that's not the story from the theater which has captured my imagination. Apparently, this theater is haunted by the ghost of a Confederate soldier. To provide some background for this story, I live in a portion of Michigan that was an active hub for the Underground Railroad. Some old homes in the area had secret rooms and pathways that gave shelter to people who had escaped slavery in the South. Many people in this area were abolitionists. Helping those who needed to find their freedom was of grave importance for many people who lived in this area at the time. My alma mater was also the location of a base of Union soldiers. These inclusive ideals aside, it apparently wasn't uncommon to see some Confederates up north while they hunted down runaway slaves. Picture a black man sprinting towards the college chapel. A Confederate soldier is chasing him while waving a blood-stained sword. This monster of a human being yells racial slurs and threats of violence toward the frightened young man. Sweating, panicking, yet full of determination, the young man runs into the chapel and up the staircase that leads to the sanctuary. When he reaches the top, he stops after hearing the Confederate's heel slip, a loud thud, and the clang of the metal sword against the marble staircase. A ghostly silence follows. The young man looks down to see the once threatening and malicious Confederate lying motionless on the staircase, his face once red from adrenaline and anger, now a bluish pale, frozen with an expression of pure terror. That sword that swung forebodingly in the air now protrudes out of a wound in the Confederate's chest, with the handle half plunged into the monster's back. The blade now features thick, fresh crimson blood, along with its brownish-red stains of past atrocities. More blood forms beneath the Confederate's lifeless body, dripping from the places where the torn flesh and metal intertwine, and down the descending set of stairs, sharply contrasting against the white marble. Aside from the drips of blood that echo from the walls, there is no sound. All is silent. When the shock wears off, the young man runs out of the door in terror, continuing his journey to freedom. Flash forward to the mid-1980s. Petticoats and bow ties make way for pastel-colored windbreakers, and the sounds of Bon Jovi and Prince blared through those so-called portable boomboxes that were the size of a semi-truck. A safety officer makes his morning rounds, opening all the buildings on campus. As he walks to the campus theater with his set of keys jangling as he sifts through them, he stops. Through a glass panel on the front door, the officer sees a man standing there, staring back at him in a blood-stained Confederate uniform. The officer lets out a blood-curdling scream, then runs off in terror. Apparently, this isn't the only time the creepy Confederate makes an appearance. A play takes place shortly after this incident, which happens to be a period piece that takes place during the Civil War. While reading an enthusiastic review about their production, the cast and crew of said play cannot help but notice a particular part of the review that praises an on-stage special effect. Apparently, the writer of this review is very affected by the shadow of a Confederate that appeared on stage during a pivotal scene. This particular portion of the review takes the students by surprise. No such special effect was performed by the crew. At least, not the ones who were living. The music building during my time at this school was formerly a frat house. Legend has it that in the late 60s, a hazing prank took place where pledges had to jump from the top-story window to a mattress below. Allegedly, one night when this pledge ceremony took place, it went horribly wrong. One Friday night during this fraternity's Hell Week, the week before newcomers are formally initiated, a pledge climbs slowly towards the window on the top story of the house, accompanied by the pledges that are lined up behind him. Let's call him Daryl. Daryl puts his sweaty palms on each side of the opening and lifts his shaking legs to place them on the windowsill. His breathing is so heavy that it almost overpowers the sound of Jimi Hendrix blaring from two giant wood-paneled speakers attached to a resident's Panasonic SD-109 turntable. He looks down to the campus below. The fraternity brothers hooting and hollering on the front lawn with cheap beer in their hands, and sees the dirty, stained mattress that lies directly in front of the building. Daryl would honestly rather die than touch that nasty thing. Daryl wonders how many romantic rendezvous have taken place on that mattress. God, he thinks to himself, the least they could do is put a clean sheet on that fucking thing. He shakes his head. He's distracting himself because he is frightened out of his goddamn wits. The mattress looks like it is an inch in diameter from his point of view. He thinks to himself, come on, Daryl. Don't be such a chicken shit. Or at least don't let them know you're a chicken shit. Do this, and they'll never let you in. Just do it. Just fucking jump. He pushes with his arms and feet and flies down to the ground below. I wonder when he knew these would be his final moments. Is it when he initially leaped out? Is it when he overheard one of his brothers-to-be yelling, no, 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 fuck, 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 fuck? Or is it when he stared in front of him and just saw grass where a dirty old mattress should have been? Either way, the stunned fraternity brothers and pledges stare in shock at the pile of flesh, bones, blood, and shreds of gore-drenched cotton and denim that used to be their friend Daryl. If it weren't for the sounds of Jimmy's guitar blaring from the stereo by the open window, you could have heard a pin drop. Shortly after the tragedy, the fraternity loses their charter, and the house sits empty for a few years, awaiting the time where the music department takes it over and it can begin a new chapter. Flash forward to the early 2010s, 20-ish-year-old me, a music lover and piano player, was rehearsing in what was the music hall at the time. It had a reputation for being haunted. Plenty of music majors who used the facilities to practice at night liked to spin yarns about footsteps and voices when they knew they were in the house alone. A ghost hunter who had a show on the Sci-Fi Network recorded an EVP in the house. I was there when it happened. It was a cool moment. I believed it at the time, but it wouldn't be the first time a TV ghost hunter turned out to be a charlatan. This is a story I was there to witness. In the middle of a normal weekend afternoon, I was doing piano accompaniment for two girls who were singing a duet for a talent show. Their run-through was going smooth. There were no wrong notes, nor were there troubles with rhythm or diction. It was a perfectly smooth run-through of the happy-go-lucky music they had chosen. The gorgeous singing I found myself getting completely lost in stopped abruptly. I stopped playing to ask, "Why the hell did you both stop? You were doing great." One of the girls looks at me and says, "I think we need to leave." I ask them, "Why?" She responds, "Because I just saw my water bottle float out of my purse." Thank you so much, Chris. That was great. Those were very, very fun. I enjoyed those immensely, and thank you for your beautiful prose to explain all the haunting stories that lead up to the hauntings. Yeah, not very eloquent at the moment. Okay, on to the next one. This one comes from JJ. Hi, Shelby. I've been a fan of the podcast for a few years now, but this is my first time writing in. After listening to the last story in Dark Reddit 7, which are my favorite, by the way, please never stop doing them, about what happened at Fort Hood, I felt like I needed to. I'm also just going to refer to it as Fort Hood for simplicity's sake. My ex-husband got stationed at Fort Hood mid-2018. We ended up in on-base housing at the main post. I can't remember the name of the community because we've moved around so much, but it was the closest one to Copperas Cove. I remember because that's where our grocery store, veterinarian, etc. was, and it was a less than 7-minute drive to get there. Anyway, our house was a ranch-style 3-bedroom, 1-bath, and altogether it was me, my ex-husband, and our then 2-year-old, and my younger sister, who had moved in with us. We had 2 dogs, both Australian Shepherds, one of whom was a puppy we just got after moving to this house. From the beginning, the house was unsettling. I don't know what it was about it, because it was a cute little house, nothing outwardly suspicious. But at night, It always felt like someone was watching us or with us. My computer was set up in the living room, and many times I would feel someone enter the room. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, like suddenly, you're not alone. And I would think my sister or ex had walked in, and look up to say hi, but there would be no one there. I could excuse this as paranoia or just an honest mistake, but my puppy, we will call him Gus, was always leashed to my desk while we were potty training, and he too would be looking at the spot where we apparently both thought someone had come in. I used to hear voices in the house when I was home alone. Usually it wasn't anything decipherable, just murmuring, almost like someone was whispering to someone else, or like a radio left on low volume. But it would stop as soon as I entered whichever room it was. On more than one occasion, I'd be home alone and the dogs would bark as if someone was at the door, but there would never be anyone there either. Sometimes the doorbell would ring on the front door that we never used. The kitchen had a doorway much closer to the end of the driveway. But I'd answer the door and nothing. You could say this was mischievous neighborhood kids, and that could be a possibility. But the thing is, the doorbell never had any batteries in it. Not since we moved in, and when you pressed it, nothing happened. But we would still hear it go off several times a month. Lastly, I was in my room watching TV one afternoon when my daughter was down for a nap, and I was half napping myself when my sister appeared in the doorway and asked me what I wanted. I was confused and asked what she meant, and she went on to tell me that I'd called her name in what sounded like an urgent voice. Thing is, though, I hadn't. She insisted it sounded like me, and after I assured her it wasn't, we were both pretty uneasy, but accepted it. Several days later, it happened to me for the first time, too. I was home, this time alone, as my sister had taken my daughter to a cookout at a friend's house. I heard my sister's voice clearly call my name from the kitchen. As expected, when I checked, no one, nothing. This happened a few times over the next couple of months, and at one point, even my sister's boyfriend heard me call her when I hadn't. And on one occasion, when I wasn't even home. Nothing ever happened that we would consider malicious or dangerous, just unsettling. But we also grew up in a Civil War era house that was definitely haunted. That's a story for another time, perhaps. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I do plan to do a bit of my own research. If I find anything particularly interesting or useful, I'll send it your way. And we are only going to do one more story for the evening. I actually got a lot more submissions for true stories than I thought, so if you sent one recently, don't worry, it may still be on the show, but I can't fit them all into this episode. But here we go. This comes from Banner, and this one really creeps me out. Hi, Shelby. I've been listening to your show for roughly 3 years now, and I'm a huge fan of all the true horror/dark Reddit content. They're some of my favorite things to listen to while I work on projects in my shop. I'm a semi-professional jeweler. I don't have many paranormal experiences to share, as I'm a bit of a skeptic, but I have one that I still have a bit of trouble explaining from when I was living with my parents. So here goes nothing. I was 16 and had just finished my sophomore year of high school, and I was on summer break. One night, I remember waking up for some unknown reason. I was pretty deep in sleep, so it was taking a second for me to become fully lucid. Once I came around, I realized it was freezing in my room, and I grabbed my comforter and pulled it closer to my neck. I live in the Midwest, and while summers can get kind of cold, it doesn't get this cold. It felt like it was 40 degrees in my room. Maybe 2 minutes later, I heard the doorknob to my bedroom door turn, and it scared the hell out of me, so I shot my head under my blanket like a child and laid still. I heard my door glide open very slowly, and stay open for what felt like forever. I'm sure it was roughly 3 to 5 seconds, but my adrenaline was high and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. Finally, a voice said, "Hey, don't worry, it's me." I realized that the voice was my mom's, but something still felt off about the whole situation because even growing up, my dad was always the one to check to see if I was asleep, never her. Eventually, the door closed after a couple of seconds of silence. I poked my head out from under my comforter and looked around my room to find absolutely nothing had changed. I looked over at my alarm clock and it was 3:20-ish in the morning. I got up, used the bathroom, and went back to bed. The next morning, I asked my mom if she'd poked her head into my room at all last night to check on me, and she told me no. I wrote it off as nothing more than waking up from a weird dream, needing a second for reality to set in, and forgot about it. Fast forward a month later, and my dad asked me, "Hey, why were you up at 3 a.m. yelling at the cat last night?" I froze for a second before I told him that I wasn't up yelling at the cat last night. He swore that he heard me walk down the hallway, yell at the cat, poke my head into his room and say, "Sorry, didn't mean to wake you up," all with my voice. I told him about my experience earlier that summer, and he was pretty freaked out. Since then, I've never had anything else happen like that, and my mom still believes my dad and I are imagining things. I'm a STEM major now, so I like to think a lot of my thought processes are rooted in reality and the observable world, which is why I'm more of a skeptic. These two events had several aspects in common, which makes me think that they might be more than just separate coincidences. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Thanks for running such an amazing show and keeping me entertained for the last 3 years. Thank you so much for that story, Banner. That was really eerie. And I love all the stories I get, but I do love getting stories from people who are self-professed skeptics, because I am as well. So these stories that are, tinged with believe me, this is not something that I just go around thinking every single thing is a ghost. And yours is so odd. It's so unique. I've never heard a story like this before. It's like, I know you said you wanted to know my thoughts on it. It sounds like, I don't even know where to begin. It sounds like some sort of I guess some people would say maybe like a demon who's trying to mimic you and your parents' voices, but I'm not much of a demon person, so that's not really where my head would go. I love kind of doppelganger type stories, and that's what it sounds like. And again, I don't know what a doppelganger is. I've just heard so many doppelganger stories, and they seem very unexplainable, and I don't know what they are. Are they... I'm not even going to begin to get into it. I'll get too out there. Okay. But thank you. And by the way, again, on social media, you can follow the show on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Please let me know all of your thoughts on any of the stories we had this week, because some of them were very interesting. I feel like could lend to some very fascinating discussion. So yeah, at Scare You to Sleep, by the way. Again, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I think those are the big three. So yeah, go follow over there go follow the show over on those, and feel free to discuss any of these stories. And thank you so much to those of you who sent stories in. I really appreciate you sharing these little pieces of yourselves, little pieces of your own lore with me and my audience. And I know that's not easy sometimes to open up about things like this. So thank you so much. And as always, if you'd like to listen to this show ad-free, you can go find it on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. And for $3 and up, you get bonus episodes. I may be changing the tiers around soon, just for various reasons. I have nothing set in stone yet. And so go get that $1 ad-free. Again, $3 and up, you get the bonus episodes, which a lot of those will be returning soon. I was very consistent with them, and I'm fortunately, as most of you know who have been listening, my grandmother passed away, and this week is actually her funeral. So it was pretty cathartic talking some true stories with you all. I find death to be just a part of life, and while I have been incredibly, incredibly sad, it's a transition that we all go through, and that's why I love the supernatural as well. I just love the idea of What's out there? What are we? I find those, sometimes those thoughts are terrifying, but I find a lot of comfort in them. And hopefully you do too. That's probably why I started this show off so weird with all of my existential questions. So I hope I didn't put you in some sort of horrifying headspace. Again, I find comfort in these types of questions about the fact that energy cannot be destroyed. It's a comforting, beautiful thought to me. And we are energy. So to any of you who may be mourning someone at the moment, I fully understand what you're going through, and you have my love and my good vibes. Good vibes. Again, I'm not feeling very eloquent this week, so I am going to go, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Hug your loved ones. Call your loved ones. If you have a loved one, whether they are blood related or not, and you're like, I've been meaning to say something, I've been meaning to call them or drop by and say hello, just do it this week. You won't ever regret. You won't ever feel like you spent too much time with someone, or you spent too much time talking to someone on the phone. You just won't, especially when it comes to some of our, our close relatives, our elderly loved ones who will be marching off to the mansions of rest soon. Okay, I will talk to you next week. Drink your water. Moisturize. I like adding that one. Moisturize. Go get some sleep. Sweet dreams.
Murder in America is a true crime podcast that covers stories from all 50 states, including stories of mass shootings, serial killers, and lesser-known murders. Do you find yourself doing more research after listening to a true crime show? Well, Courtney and I used to do the same thing, and that's why we created Murder in America. Our podcast dives deep into each case. Our storytelling will make you feel like you're right there within the case with us, watching it all play out, and we do not shy away from the graphic details. If you're a fan of true crime, then listen to Murder in America on Spotify now.
Every town has its dark history. Hometown Ghost Stories is a paranormal podcast that goes town to town all across the globe, exploring the world's most haunted places, tapping into the dusty archives and the darkest corners to bring you the most terrifying stories of real people and their harrowing experiences. Hometown Ghost Stories dives into the history of haunted locations and investigates why and how these places earned their terrifying reputation. Rob, Dave, and Jesse go live every Tuesday night after an uninterrupted documentary-style breakdown on the case, followed by an open discussion with live viewers. Subscribe today to listen to Hometown Ghost Stories on your preferred podcast platform, or watch the video version on YouTube and now Spotify. Head on over to the Bloody FM podcast network and check out Hometown Ghost Stories, if you're brave enough.